Rock Solid Radio wants to thank Hummel Insurance Group for sponsoring today's show. Hummel Insurance Group now owns and operates 7 different offices located throughout the tri-state area. For over 50 years now, the Hummel Insurance Group has been assisting customers with insurance needs and questions. For all your insurance needs, contact Hummel Insurance Group at 812-537-1785.
Hi, welcome to Rock Solid Radio. I'm Linda Hutchinson, and I am joined here by my husband, Merrill. How are you today, babe?
I'm doing okay, I guess. I'm struggling a little bit. I think we just recorded. I don't even know what show I'm doing right now.
What do you mean?
Am I doing Strong Dads? Like, I was confused. The other day we did Strong Dads, and you took the place of Kyle. And so now we're sitting back down again, and the other day I thought we were doing Rock Solid Radio.
Okay, I'm just going to have full disclosure here. That caused an argument.
Yeah, it did. It did cause an argument.
So after 34 years of marriage, when you record together and work together, you sometimes have disagreements. So.
Well, it speaks to working together and how minds go in different directions. Mm-hmm. And when you have a preconceived idea of where something or how something should go, and it doesn't, it flips you upside down.
So hopefully this one will go better.
We shall see. We'll see.
No, but that is a perfect segue, hon, because we are talking today about confusion and about our plan and our purpose for our life. And sometimes we're going to tackle a subject, hon, that isn't an easy one. It's very tough. And we unfortunately deal with it a lot in our coaching ministry, working with families. And so there's families that are struggling, hon, on how to respond to someone they love who is coming out, whether it be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. And so this show is for Christians and also non-Christians. We'll talk about that a little later, but we just wanted to have a conversation about this very important topic that is around us a lot. It's kind of in our faces, and it's kind of it's being surrounded by a lot of families, including ours. So we just want to have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, there's always been an issue, especially with younger or teens and coming into adulthood, on identity. And so none of that is actually really new. For years in schools, you had your jocks and your nerds and your band people and your grunges and all of these people. And it's always interesting to go to the 5-year reunion or the 10-year reunion, and none of those people seem to fit that
kind of settles out,
category like it did. And so that whole searching for who I'm going to connect with, who I'm going to associate with, who am I in this mess of people? It's a searching process. And so I think, hon, something that we see differently, or I should say not different as much as the intensity, the amount and frequency, are when we're questioning our actual body, when we talk about the transgender type stuff. We saw a lot of that with anorexia. All right, and still can continue when we question the body itself. But it seems to be taking on a little bit of a life of its own, and it's not always a good situation, right?
Yeah.
It's a difficult situation because of the amount of confusion that people experience.
And so this has been a topic that's been laying on our hearts for a while, and it's a tough topic, and we know that we're not going to have all kinds of people agree with us, but we felt like as professionals that this is something that families are facing, and we wanted to address it. And it's also a topic that our pastor recently talked about. And afterwards, I was with a group of women who said, I wish he would have gone further. Like, I need some practical tools. Like, I need some just flat out, what do I do in these situations? And so we're going to kind of talk a little bit about that.
I think it's also important to kind of admit that we do not have all the answers, and no one does. And so we have to be really careful when somebody comes in and they just have either side that they might be coming from, like their answer is the right one. I also think it's important that we take the time to understand where we are coming, like where we base our understanding from. Because if it's changing a lot and it's just based off of more hearsay and that kind of thing, that can get us into some challenging spaces. So, we're just going to try to walk through some of this. Don't have all the answers. We also don't have all of the circumstances for maybe your family or your situation. So we're just going to try to walk through this in terms of how we would process it with someone, to how we could help. That we're obviously always open to conversation about these things.
Yeah. So as our pastor said recently, truth without compassion is just downright mean, but compassion without truth is meaningless. And so we're going to try to tackle it with both compassion and truth today. And so, if this is something that you personally are dealing with or somebody in your family, we hope that, and we know it's emotionally charged, so we're asking you to kind of step back and really just walk with us in this conversation.
All right, so very good. Let's thank a couple sponsors, hon, and we'll talk about just a couple of events we have. So, and then we'll get right into this topic. So, we first like to thank Casey's Outdoor Solutions and Hummel Insurance for their support of Rock Solid Radio. So, do us a favor and support those two businesses that are in our local community that believe in supporting messages like this.
Yeah, and we have two events coming up in February. One is February 12th. It's a parenting workshop at Urban Crest Church in Lebanon, Ohio. The deadline is the week before, so go to urbancrest.org if you're interested in signing up and being a part of that. It's like a 9 to 4 kind of day, and lunch is included, so we would love to see you there. As well as a marriage workshop on February 19th at Bright Christian Church in Bright, Indiana, Lawrenceburg, Indiana. And so you can go to brightcc.org on February 19th, for February 19th. That deadline is the week before as well. And join us for Secure the Knot, a marriage workshop.
Yep, excellent stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into this. So
Yeah.
what do you want to start with?
So,
how do you
honey,
want to launch this?
So I honestly,
you go first.
I honestly want to bring up the fact that you took me on a date the other night. And it was your idea.
Big spender.
Well, it was, but it was your idea, and you suggested a movie, which I had not heard about before. You had seen the trailer, and I had no idea walking in, and it was a difficult movie to watch.
Yeah, I was the only guy in the stand. That's why it was difficult. It was. I came to find out it was a chick flick.
Oh,
no,
well,
there were a few guys there.
Yeah, but the movie was called Redeeming Love, and it's not a child movie. It's not something for your children because it was very sexual in nature. But honestly, I feel like it was a movie we were supposed to see before the show. And the reason why is it was a storyline of a young girl who has experienced great tragedy, including losing her mother and really never knowing her father. But after her mother died, she was sold into prostitution, where she worked in a brothel in the 1800s. And, the reason...
Can I just say first, like how her mother came into hard times.
Yes.
And she had to start prostituting.
Yeah.
And so this 8-year-old girl, that's all she began to see in terms of how they survived. So I just wanted to say that, it wasn't like her mom started off that way. She got pressed into a very difficult point in life. And that was her way to get through it.
And the reason why I bring up this movie is that this young girl grew up very confused about who she was and why she was here on this earth. She struggled to love herself enough to accept God's best for her life, even when it was put right in front of her. And I believe that's what's happening, hon, to so many teens and adults today, is that something has happened in their life that has created this confusion, this seeking. And, I believe it's caused some of what we're seeing today. For instance, someone has betrayed them. Someone they've trusted in, whether it be a parent, whether it be a spouse, whether it be a friend, and someone has betrayed them that they trusted in, and that has created confusion. What else do you see?
As kind of like in the movie, what they saw as a model, what was being represented to them, and whether it was intentional or unintentional, just what you see at a young age, like, eventually, like, well, this is how life rolls, and so you don't tend to question it, and especially if there's a level of trying to normalize it. It's one thing if your parents are going through a difficult time and they're telling you, this is a difficult time, we don't want to do this. But when you have to normalize it because you don't see any end in sight, like this is just how life rolls, then at an early age, kids kind of accept that.
Yeah. You know, there was an underlying faith component in this movie, which I had no idea. And God was very distorted in this young girl's life because of what she experienced. And even her mom was a Christian woman, but yet these things that happened to her family, it was almost like this young woman blamed God. And I think that happens so many times, that God is distorted or misrepresented by people and blamed for what's going on in their life. And that causes confusion and identity issues.
And the reality of what we see with this and what the research shows too, when we're talking about some of the kids that go through and adults that go through this confusion, is that they themselves had a past experience of what we might call abuse or trauma in the sexual way. And that is not unusual at all. In fact, it's very common in that population, higher in that population than in just the regular population that would say they'd never had any of those experiences. And so there's a lot of connection in that. Like, okay, well, I can't just say that didn't have an influence because there's a common thread there.
Yeah, so all of those things we just mentioned, those are underlying issues that have caused a wound. And these folks, a lot of them are searching for how to heal, how to find identity, how to find peace. And they're not going to find it in what they're seeking with same-sex attraction or activity, okay? But honestly, there might be some parents listening, hon, who would say their kids haven't experienced any of that. Like they've been raised in a Christian home or a healthy model was seen. And so what we are seeing more and more is just the connection to confusing messages, that our kiddos are listening to conflicting messages by people they care about, friends and family, that don't jive together. And because of that, they are being thrown into this confusion of, who do I listen to? Like, who's telling me the truth?
You know, you just cannot discredit, hon, the amount of exposure we get through, I'll call it advertising, but it doesn't even need to be advertisement to sell a product. It can be advertisement to sell an idea. And we're seeing so much of that it actually does have substance to it in terms of people buying it. And the idea that you would have a saturation of these messages coming through on social media. And then not only is it being pushed that way, especially to our younger kids, if you reject it, you could be rejected. And so now it's coming with a stigma. Right. And that stigma, like, well, listen, I don't want to be considered prejudiced or biased in some way or mean. So like, I don't want to be in that camp. And so it almost is like, if you don't buy it, you have a problem.
Yeah. And when on the same vein, we're hearing from a lot of younger people, the Gen Z, saying, well, you're old fashioned. Like, get with the times. This is what life is now. This is what relationships look like now. And can I just tell you, homosexuality dates before Jesus, that in the Old Testament, there was homosexuality activity.
And there's nothing new under the sun.
No, there was depravity on the sexual nature so much in the Old Testament. It was not condoned by God, but it was seen by God. And so when you hear that, I just want you to push back with your teens or your other adults that maybe are coming at you like you're old fashioned and you're not with it. Like, this is not new. Homosexuality and coming out is not new. And that is something that God has been very clear about, how he wants us to live our lives and how he wants us to handle this subject.
I think it's important. Okay, we're working through this with you guys so that you can kind of see how we come to how we're going to handle this. There's definitely been times in my life when I was like, well, what's the big deal? I mean, as long as it's their business, okay? And the longer that we've worked with people, it's actually been the working with people that has led me even more to trying to really understand. And the bottom line here is God's nature has its own path. Like, God has designed things that we don't really get a say on, like how his nature is going to be. The sun comes up, the sun goes down, the trees bloom, they have their cycles. And I've talked about this before. He also has his nature with us. and all other animals and plants, okay? And what's really kind of interesting in our work is that we see that when we do marriage differently than what God says, it causes tension and strife.
Yeah.
When
Confusion.
it causes confusion, and I don't even have to know the Bible to know that.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden, we start to have we talked on the show the other day about swingers, right? Or when we go outside of the marriage, and the next thing you know, there's dissension, and before you know it, the marriage is blowing apart, and you're like, I didn't have to see the Bible to say why that would go against God's nature. And so, a lot of what we're seeing here is when we talk about this confusion, and it tends to come up with our teens, but it can go into adulthood, that I'm going against the natural flow of God's plan. And when that happens, that causes the confusion that you talked about. Confusion in my brain causes tension. Okay, so think about this. If you're out driving on the road and you get lost, okay? When you get lost, if I put a blood pressure cuff on you, I would find that you had an increased blood pressure and heart rate. It causes tension. I can only sustain that for a certain amount of time before my body says, I've got to figure this out. I've got to search this. And that's when I start to have anxiety, rebellion. I'm fighting. I'm trying to figure it out. And that's when people finally start to seek us out, right? Like, because it's the symptoms that they have. And finally, if I'm not getting anywhere, I become hardened.
Yeah. Honey, what you just described with God's nature, that's actually general revelation. In other words, you could never own a Bible, never read a Bible, never know about God's word or believe in God's word, but you see God's word in general revelation out in his nature. And so he has told us and showed us what it looks like to be in relationships and what it looks like to be healthy. And you don't even have to read a Bible to see that. Right. But you know, all of us, hon, want to be loved. All of us want to be whole and complete. And when we don't feel that way, again, you don't even have to know the Bible to know that you're not feeling good and that you're not feeling healthy. And so when we see our, LGBTQ clients come in, and we've had some, when they are out of God's nature, when they are going against God's way, they're coming in with anxiety and depression and they're doing it the way they want, right? But it's not the way God designed it. And so our goal is to help family members and also those struggling with gender identity to really understand, like, where is this anxiety and depression and confusion coming from? And it's because we're not following God's plan.
It's difficult because if I take God out of the picture, then I'm feeling like it's not God that's rejecting me. It's our culture, civilized cultures come and have a general belief system that allows them to run together. And so when the kid goes to school and he feels rejected, he doesn't feel rejected by God. He feels rejected by all these kids. So now the message is all these kids need to change. And you're asking then society to change, which is generally going to work in God's nature because that's how it works. Right. And so trying to get folks to understand it's an uphill battle trying to change society because it has to flow in God's nature.
Yeah.
All right.
It's kind of like swimming upstream without a paddle.
Yeah, and you'll get pockets. You'll get pockets of it that will kind of break out of that as they break away from God. But by and large, in order for nature to roll, it has to follow its own way. Yeah. So anyway, hon, you're right. I mean, at the bottom line of all of this, how do we do this? How do we approach this entire confusion and tension and anxiety with love and respect, right? Without jeopardizing my own value system, all right? So how do we do that?
Yeah, so the last thing in the world that our loved ones need when they're in this confusion state is judgment and condemnation. Like, that just might push them over the edge. And we already see them with self-harm and drugs and alcohol and suicidal ideation. Like, those are already higher. Now, people would say that's because people are judging them and condemning them. But I would also say that goes because of going against, swimming upstream.
There's an internal tension.
Yeah, there is. And so we just kind of want to talk about some different scenarios on that we see walking in our office and kind of break them down. And the first one is, you're a Christian and someone you love has come out. Okay. And so the question is, you're asking, how do I speak the truth in love without making them feel condemned condemned or judged, because we're called to do both. We're called to speak the truth, but we're called to do it in love.
Well, so are you presenting that to me?
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
We always have to check now because we've stepped on each other's toes. So if you're presenting that to me, and this is why we have to be really careful, because not every answer or response is going to cover every scenario. But if you're presenting that to me, and this is a person that lives in my home.
Yes, let's say they're a minor.
Okay, and so they're a teenager or a minor, and they're living in my home. I have to understand, I am their parent, okay? I am there to love them, but I'm also there to help establish values and to try to guide them in those values. And so the idea that one of our kids and those, ripe years of teenage years and trying to get through identity, the idea of just, especially now that I know that I'm trying to stay in God's nature, I cannot open the door to saying, just do your thing. I can't do that, and I can't do that because one, I truly believe in God's nature. All right, I believe that our kids were made on purpose for purpose. Yep. Okay, and they're not going to be, in my mind, identified by their sex or by their calling out their gender. Okay, and so I would have to put limits on them. Yeah. Like I would have to say, okay, in our house, you're under our roof, and I would not allow certain, bringing in the girlfriend, so to speak, or letting them sleep or be together, those kind of things, not under my roof. Now that could come to change when they are adults.
Yeah. So let's talk about, again, we're talking about someone in your home, under your roof. And part of, I think, the confusion for our kids, which I didn't grow up with and you didn't grow up with, was the fact that now we have separated sex and gender. And God's word, it's one and the same. Your sex is your gender. You don't get to make it and divide it and call what you want your gender, even regardless of what your sexual orientation is. And so that's something that we've got to teach our children, because it is so confusing for them. We have hypersexualized our children. They're talking about things and hearing things that I never would have heard of at their age. And it's very confusing. If someone had told me that at 11 years old, that my best friend across the street, I was attracted to her and that we were lesbians, I don't know what I would have done with that. She was my best friend.
Attracted in a romantic way.
Yeah. Like I didn't like boys.
Way.
She was my best friend. And so that would have really been very confusing to me. But I didn't hear those messages. I didn't see that option as being there. So no one questioned it. We had sleepovers, we traded clothes, not like turning, but like we would switch around and borrow each other's toys and clothes, but no one would have thought we were lesbians.
And no different than us as boys. As boys, up to, I think it was the age of 10 or 11, you still had to get cootie spray so you couldn't hang around girls, so you get cooties. And so guys hung around guys, girls hung around girls, and so we had to have a prescription for cootie spray to protect us from you evil
cootie
things.
Spray.
Yeah, you don't remember cooties? You get cooties.
Yes, I do.
And so again, it's just that idea that we have to identify with our group, right? But that I do not, especially with my kids at those ages, do not want to then say, well, they must be more girl-like or more boy-like. It's like, no, this is just part of the process of growing and establishing who we are in our identity.
And can we say this? There is a difference between same-sex attraction and same-sex actions, okay? And so one is a sin and one is not. And so just because you maybe are attracted to someone of the same sex, you have that attraction, if you don't act on that, that's not a sin, okay? Satan uses all kinds of different things to tempt us and pull us away from a relationship with Christ and doubt God's word as being truth. And so this is one way. But just because you have those attractions or those tendencies does not mean you have to act on them. Just as if you thought a girl walking down the street was sexy, you may think that and that's a temptation, but you don't act on that.
Right.
You can hold that back and have self-control, and that's what God's asking us to do.
Yeah. So, I mean, just how do we walk through helping our own kids, all right? And so we talked a little bit about that. I do want to say something, hon, so you parents out there, if I could just go there for a second. So before you just have this open conversation with your kids, know what you believe first. And know why you believe what you believe. This is something that Linda and I have had to do because of our job demands it. I'm not going to willy-nilly just throw some advice out. I want people to know, and I'm not even saying that my way is the right way or only. It's I'm just telling you, if you've walked in here, this is how I'm going to base my response, okay? And as parents, we need to be able to do that. Because if I'm just changing with the weather, if the next message I get or the TV show, which, hun, we talked about this a little bit, when you research this topic, you can get so staunch, hardcore on one side, or you can get so loose and
you can find
wide open on
want.
the other side. And so you'll find whatever you're looking for.
Yes.
And so I think that the thing here is in our work, we had to say, well, what's right, right? And we have to use, for us, we have to use God's underpinning is, well, this is how we will approach this. And so that would be one thing I'd say to do, at least our parents. Before you just because the culture seems to be bringing it up, how does that run long term? What's the long term payout here? Are you going to bring God in the picture, or have you already shut God out of the picture? So it's very important. And if we're trying to give a little bit of help to our parents here, make sure you know how you're going to approach this before you even try to approach it.
So we're going to move to adults here in a second, but before we do, one last thing about children in your home. There does come a day when just because mom and dad says so is not enough. We've reached that with pretty much all 5 of our children, right? So you have got to surround them with positive and healthy people that are going to speak the same kind of truth that you believe in, okay? We believe that comes from church environment, youth group, that kind of stuff. But man, please, and then limit the exposure to the other stuff. So if they've got a good friend who has fallen in love with your child and they're having attractions, and I would extremely limit the exposure to that child and those messages, okay? If they're listening to certain kind of music or if they're hanging out with a certain group of people, please, they are under your roof. You are the parent. Make your stand on, no, we're just not going to go down those roads because of what it's doing in the confusion for our children.
Yeah, and again, this is age appropriate at that time. So all of a sudden, your kid becomes an adult and they're out doing their life. Things now start to change, and our goal starts to change. Early on, our goal is to try to implement and encourage and teach values, values that we believe are going to fare well through their life. As they get older, they're going to have their values, right? They're not asking mommy and daddy for permission to do things.
And they might look different than yours.
Yeah. And at that point, if we're going to have any opportunity to influence, then, hun, it shifts to relationship.
Yeah, it does. And Proverbs 22:6 says, start children off in the way they should go, and when they're old, they will not turn from it. I've had so many parents push back and go, really? But honestly, it's the Holy Spirit that honestly goes with them. They leave your home, they become adults, and you have given that foundation, and the Holy Spirit, it's almost like, I won't say haunts them, but continues to convict them.
Right.
It's almost like there's going to be this wrestling, this moral wrestling that goes on if you have trained them in the way they should go. And you've got to make room for the Holy Spirit. You can't put your thumb down on them. They're adults. Yeah. And if they're under your roof, I will say this, if they're under your roof and they do not agree to follow in line with your values, then you need to show them the door. That's really hard. It's really hard. And that isn't just with same-sex attraction either. That's with drug use. That's with premarital sex, heterosexual sex, whatever. If they're not falling in line and being willing to live with your value system in your home, you need to remind them it is your home. And you just kindly, respectfully, but firmly say, I think it's probably time for you to move out.
So, hon, then that goes to the next level of when we are talking now to them and are at the adult level. That doesn't mean now I'm going to jeopardize my values.
That's true.
Okay. And this is a two-way street. I think sometimes this conversation gets really warped out to one side, meaning that those who are in the minority, they should get all the concession here. And the deal is really here. This is a two-way value street. Like, okay, now when I'm in your house, okay, I am going to abide by your values and your rules for you.
And if I don't agree and I don't want to, then I don't go in your home.
Then I don't go in your home.
Because it's your home.
And when you're in my home, okay, so the idea, like, let's say you had a gay daughter, and
that would be a lesbian daughter, a gay son.
Well, gay used to be. See, it changes all the time. Gay used to be general, okay.
Yeah.
And so, so you had a lesbian daughter who got married, right, and got married and brought her, would you call that wife or a significant other into your home, okay. It is still okay for you to have, but I want to do this beforehand. I don't want to do this and all of a sudden in the heat of the moment, the emotions get, it's like, okay, hey, you're coming to my house, so in my home, all right? And this is no different than I remember when cigarette smoking, finally people started to stand up and they're like, listen, I know you're a smoker, but if you're coming to visit me, please don't smoke in my house.
Yeah,
okay?
Please respect my values.
It's the same idea. Yeah. And so you have to have that conversation, right? Like, listen, you're an adult. What you do in your world, because I don't want the fact that you're a smoker to mean that you and I can't talk anymore.
Yeah.
All right? I want to keep the relationship. Just because you're a lesbian, that doesn't mean I don't want to love you. I do.
Yeah.
Right? But I also need you to honor my value system like I'm trying to honor your value system.
So we have 4 sons, 1 daughter. So let's say one of our sons is gay and he marries or has a boyfriend and he wants to come and, move in town or come in town and visit us. And so we have younger children still in our home. And so we're going to have this conversation ahead of time with them. We're going to say, hey, we respect where you're at. We don't, approve of the relationship and, the lifestyle that you're doing, but we love you, right? We want a relationship with you. But we're asking that you get a hotel. If you're going to come with your boyfriend, we're asking that you get a hotel because in our home, we're trying to raise our children, our son and daughter still in the home, with the understanding of what God's asking for us. And so we're asking you to respect that. And they have a choice to make. If they get offended by that and don't want to come in town, don't want to see you, then, again, we're loving but respectfully, firmly sharing, like, this is our values and we're asking you to respect them. And so, but if you go visit them in Washington State, then, you got to know.
Can't tell them to not sleep in their bed together.
Like, that's their home and you're visiting. So you have to respect where they're at.
The challenge that we're seeing in a lot of these conversations is when people say, listen, if you won't accept me to be in this relationship, then I don't even want to be in a relationship with you. And that's when they have identified themselves that they are no longer a person. They are a person with this identity. And so it's that identity, and that's a dangerous place to be. Like, yes, our kids are their gender, but they're way more than that. They're way more than their gender. They're loving people. They're contributors. They're on a purpose for something. And so I don't want to say, well, you're gay, and so that's my gay son. No, like.
That's your son.
That's my son.
That's your son.
That's my son, and the gayness is just another attribute of many. Oh, you're the gay engineer son. You're the, you know what I mean? Like, you don't refer to people that way.
And so let's say it's not a child. Let's say it's someone else that you work with, you're friends with, someone else you care about that's not in your home. Just like that movie, Hun, God's redeeming love is where we should be trying to shine, just like the story we watch, shining light into the darkness, into the confusing world, preaching to them and judging them and condemning them is not going to win them for the Lord. That is not going to open their heart and mind up to truth. And so we have got to constantly be thinking, is what I'm about to do, is what I'm about to say going to sever the relationship and lose my chance for the right to be heard? And that's what we got to decide, whether it's a family member or not. God has asked us to be in a relationship so that we can have influence and make disciples for him.
Yeah, you have to remember that when especially younger people are starting to come into these identity issues, that it's not like well, I casted it in stone, and it is what it is. It's an evolutionary process of them going
Growing.
through.
Yep.
They grow through it. They have the life experiences, and then this is no surprise to us that those who are in the transgender world are calling themselves transgender in their teens. By the time they're in their mid-20s, I think that percentage is somewhere around 80%.
80%.
Come out and say, no, it's really not where I'm at. And again, so we don't want to get crazy about this, because they're going to go through this process and start connecting the dots and making sense. Yeah. And you don't need to, dispose of them. You want to keep that relationship.
And that's also why you don't act on it, especially as a minor, in your home, why you would go and get sex change or hormone therapy. Because if 80% of them as a teenager identifying as transgender will not do that as an adult, why would you want to change their bodies and so much of who they are? That's going to be something they resent later.
That would be, hon, if you bringing that back a little bit, like if you were to propose the question again to me with my teen, that would certainly 100% be off limits for me. Like I would say, this was no different in our house. We said, listen, if you want to get a tattoo someday, awesome, go do that. But you will be out of our house when you do that. And we only did it not because we're against tattoos, but because we see that as a permanent change with a very, very plastic sort of flexible mind.
Yeah.
And so are you ready to put something on your body
or do to your body
that you're going to live with into your 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And so that is a parent, like we do that as a parenting responsibility. Like, listen, at the end of the day, if you want to do this when you're an adult, then that's on you. But we can't do that.
Yeah.
And so
we don't want to make that call.
That conversation with parents, even going in and promoting that, it's just so dangerous to do.
Yeah. So if you're not a Christian and you've listened to this program, maybe someone shared this with you, thank you for listening in on a family conversation, because we are speaking from a biblical perspective. We are speaking and believe, as a matter of fact, my shirt, I love this shirt, I wore it on purpose. It says, Jesus changes everything. And I believe that Jesus has called us to love others. What is he asking us to do? How are we to respond according to what Christ has called us to do? And we believe that he is telling us to love. He's telling us to continue to speak the truth in love. Ephesians 4:15 says, we will no longer, 14 and 15, we will no longer be infants tossed back and forth by the waves, like you said, hon, with every new idea and teaching and cunning and craftiness and deceitfulness. Like that's what we're seeing in our world today. That's the 14 verse. But then Ephesians 4:15 says, instead, speak the truth in love, and we will grow up to become, in every respect, the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. Like, that's how we find maturity and health and wholeness, is when we continue to seek out truth and speak truth in love.
Yeah. So, guys, hopefully some of our at least thinking on the fly a little bit in this conversation, and hopefully it made some sense to you. We want to encourage you, if we can help with this conversation in your home, I think that's our best with just trying to help. And I want to really be careful to say every family dynamic is just a little bit different. And so we walk through here with a lot of things in mind: parenting, relationship, the value of God. All of these things are players that we want to be very careful about. And so be careful if you're out there just throwing down your opinion on things. Explore this. This is definitely a heavy topic.
Yeah. And again, if you are having this conversation with someone who doesn't have the same value system or the same foundation of faith, then you're really kind of talking apples and oranges, you know? Like, they're not going to get it. They don't agree with you and what you're building and basing your decisions on. And so be careful with that. And again, if they're on the outside looking in, what are they seeing in us? Are they seeing love? Are they seeing grace? Or are they seeing judgment and condemnation?
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so our challenge really for you guys is to to be thinking about just healthy relationships, thinking about if you are in this experience. And so maybe a lot of you out there listening are not in this experience right now, but be thinking about your stance on these kinds of things, especially if you're in the parenting realm, and how you're going to approach this with your kids. We have not had any of our kids come out with any of these, but we have spoken to our kids about these things because they're seeing it. Don't put your head in the sand about this topic.
Help them navigate.
Our kids are in the public school setting, and they are seeing this stuff more than any of you as adults ever experienced, in the public school setting back when you were in school. And so it's very, very prevalent.
Yeah,
So
good point, hon. Good point. We've got to continue the
prepared.
conversation with our children. We've got to navigate this with them. Do not just ignore the topic or pretend like it doesn't exist. This is a daily struggle that our kids are really navigating every day.
All right, very good. So again, guys, we're asking for your help. We're asking for your help to share our shows, to give us 5-star ratings. Please, if this is a topic, maybe it didn't really hit the button for you because you're not experiencing it, but you know someone who is, please share that. I mean, the goal here is education and just helping to support. And so help us get our messages out. If we can help you in these topics or in any arena with marriage and family and just personal coaching, please reach out at rocksolidfamilies.org or give us a call at 812-576-7625. Hun, thank our sponsors. Can you do that?
Thank you so much for Casey's Outdoor Solutions and Hummel Insurance Group for their support of Rock Solid Radio. And thank you for listening to Rock Solid Radio, building a stronger community, one family at a time. Make it a great day. Cootie spray?
Rock Solid Radio wants to thank Casey's Outdoor Solutions. Casey's is a premier garden center and gift shop located in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. They offer a wide selection of high-quality plants, landscaping materials, and home decor. They do amazing high-quality work and can help you transform your indoor and outdoor living spaces into something beautiful. So stop by Casey's Outdoor Solutions today and let them know you appreciate their support for Rock Solid Radio. Visit Casey's today at 21481 State Line Road, Lawrenceburg, Indiana.